Greetings from our Capital podcast dedicated to venture investments, private equity funds, investor relations, alternative asset classes, and whatnot related to global investments. Soon we will make you happy with new content and new experts in the field of real estate, investments, and businesses. Traditionally, before I introduce you to our today's guest and we start the show, I have a quick request. If you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and don't forget to like, comment, and share because, as you know, all your efforts are highly appreciated and help us grow. So, our today's guest is a beautiful lady, investor relations expert, and my long established friend, Nadya Nesterova, who has more than 20 years of experience in investor relations, fundraising, and business development for the hedge funds, real estate, private equity funds, and projects with participation in more than 15 international campaigns with private and institutional investors from the Middle East, from Europe, Asia, America, totaling more than $2 billion US. Nadia is also an independent director of the National Alternative Investment Management Association, and she's very active in business development and investor relations advisory of a number of leading GPs and family offices with diversified portfolios in real estate, private equity, and venture capital. So, Nadia, welcome to our Capital podcast. Thank you so much again for coming. So just to start for our audience, could you please explain what is an alternative asset? Just in few simple words.
Yeah, if we talk about alternative investments, first of all, we mean real assets, private equity, natural resources, infrastructure, and hedge funds. Everything which is outside, so publicly traded assets, it's outside of the alternatives.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you so much. I would like to start our podcast with the story behind your career. So, how did you come to the investor relations field? Could you please give me a quick overview of that?
First of all, thank you for inviting me today, and thank you for letting me sharing my story and the story of companies I worked with and still continue working with. So, I started my career in 2003. With a global hedge fund. It's a team of Vermouth Asset Management. They're still active globally. And at that time, they just started and had around 10 million US dollars, which they gained on their 35% annual returns annually during around 10 years of their own track record. And they opened to international investors back at that time. So I joined their team and they started their international fundraising programs. And by 2008, they gained around 1.2 billion assets under management in 3 funds, including the deep value component in their strategy, which included also private equity and real estate. And now, of course, they started with primarily family offices and they're friendly investors, as you usually start with friends, family.
And fools, by the way.
Yes, but not in their case now, because it's hedge funds usually they're famous that they're really the high end in terms of education and background. People get into hedge fund industry usually after strategic consulting, Big Four experience, and a lot of entrepreneurial experience and operations in various fields. The team is really elite in terms of their education in finance, and they gained such institutional investors on board as Goldman Sachs or Arrow Hedge, Adam Street Partners, or Nomura, having all the different types of investors in their base. Actually, investor family, I would say, from family offices, high net worth individuals, various geographies, fund of funds, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and huge pension schemes. So this is one of the major components for each fund to have this diversification in their investor base, to feel sustainable, both in various geographies if they work globally, because the markets are reshuffling from time to time. There's a lot of turbulence and volatility, and it was an immense fundraising campaign through years, adding new strategies, new funds. For instance, their first fund was evergreen, so you're always in fundraising. The management is always on the roadshow. The next team I worked with was integrated investment bank, also working globally with around 6 billion under management, and I worked in their private equity arm, which specialized in mid-market companies, also Western Eastern Europe, and scaling and rolling out businesses in primarily consumer-driven fields. Their fundraising campaign I joined was their third fund, with $850 million US dollar target. And also they had such development banks on board as EBRD, as I mentioned, and Temasek was their anchor investor. The diversification principle was also in line, and with a huge demand from investors. The next strategy I joined in my career was also private equity and private equity real estate. It was a team initially focused on hotel developments and also Greater Europe focus, Western and Eastern Europe, the same geographic areas. And actually, they also breached developed economies and emerging economies. And for instance, we brought in such brands as Four Seasons, the first to the emerging market under our focus, Intercontinental, Holding Express brand, and Marriott. It was a regional hotel chain project for mid-market opportunities and luxury brands I mentioned.
Which country was that?
Actually, it's Eastern Europe primarily. They also had several projects, and still some of them are still in their portfolio in Western Europe, in Vienna, Davos, in Umbria, in Italy. So these projects are still developing and evolving. Later on, I joined also as investor relations and fundraising campaigns for mid-cap companies, primarily on secondary private equity markets, and also different types of products with diversified private equity offerings and various types of funds. Also pre-IPO stage, so late-stage companies, and some of the players, they have around 30 products currently in their portfolio, and assets under management amounting to over 700 million under management. And still it's an ongoing process. There are huge names such as Cohere, OpenAI, Revolut, and others. And we are always at the cutting edge of innovation, supporting big teams with institutional investors and making their access to the pipeline of AA class deals easier through marketplace type of platforms. So this is kind of steps from small projects and also big scale funds. And investor relations role is to manage through this and convey each particular story, bring it to investors, pitch it through roadshows, one-to-one meetings, reporting, everything. So it's a whole universe full of lots of adventures.
You have mentioned, I think, several times the word diversification, and from my perspective, this is one of the smartest investment strategies for everyone when you put eggs into different buckets and pockets, and in case one asset doesn't increase your expectations, then it can be offset by others. So, if we continue talking about a bit more about alternative asset classes, what initially attracted you to this kind of asset? And what do you generally think about investing in real estate?
Working with alternatives, you have access to bringing value directly to the teams you work with. For instance, in private equity, if you the role of investors, for instance, at the venture capital stage is huge. So they usually look for smart money approach, and they need your connection, your experience in various fields. If we are talking about investors, they expect you as investor to accelerate their growth. And of course, you as investor can play an active role in that. Of course, when I worked with a hedge fund, our team was also promoting the approach of shareholder activism. You can also impact the growth of companies and their transparency, ESG codes, and corporate governance, and all the other issues. When you work with earlier stages companies from VC to pre-IPO, you have the whole spectrum of instruments and tools how to bring in value. So, and this is the core of every team, at the core of our strategy as well, how they add this value to each particular company and gain the synergy effect on the portfolio level for the whole structure. And each investor also may gain the synergy effect for their portfolios. And that's why investor relations role is that important, so that you have individual approach, tailor-made approach, not only to your portfolio, but to your investor base as well, so that your communication with them and your strategy, how you do fundraising, what types of investors are in, so that this value growth, capitalization growth would work for your portfolio companies, for your company capitalization, and for the gains investors would get through multiplication of their returns and so on.
What unique opportunities and challenges do you see in managing investor relations, let's say for hedge funds, private equity, and hospitality real estate funds?
As I mentioned, it's all about people anyway, so you communicate with people directly. Of course, each type of the investors have their own requirements and have their own mandate, strategy, their plans for 12, 18, 24 months and so on. You need to take into account their plans for development as well, planning your fundraising campaigns. And fundraising is a bit different with investor relations, because here it's important to be in compliance with regulatory bodies, to prepare reporting analytics on each of the portfolio companies, portfolio monitoring with monthly newsletters, interim reports, quarterly reports, annual reports, investor base, kind of taking care of your investor base as your investor family, actually, with investor days, bringing them to on-site visits to your companies, so that they could get a feeling of your input to the company, so that they could get the direct response and feedback on your work as a GP from your investee companies. So that's important to show the whole picture, as well as it's not only one way. When you speak to your investors, you get their stories, and there are lots of synergy effects on partnerships. For instance, building this digital marketplace for various investors on pre-IPO companies of A-class investment targets. It's important also to know what your investors are, how they can access that, make it easy for them, all the reporting, all the databases, all the analysis, because, for instance, the scoring models of various investee companies, when they only get into your scope or pipeline, the scoring system may include around 100 or more parameters, right? Risk management, their growth drivers, risk mitigation policies, the market volume itself and the market drivers itself, the competition landscape, everything. You need to be in the picture of everything, and you need to deliver this information. And to add to that, the turbulence of the market, the news are not always positive, and companies go through their ups and downs. For instance,
Indeed.
during the COVID times, for instance, was really a lockdown experience. It was heavy for all of us, but as part of our, for instance, initiative with the National Alternative Investment Management Association and blockchain platform we worked with 500,000 audience in that, we had around 80 online meetings and pitch sessions for startups
During COVID.
Yeah, and
Wow.
Startup Leaders Club, just to promote venture capital live streams, and so that companies who could not reach their investors during their fundraising campaigns could have direct access to them through pitching Q&A sessions and get their feedback. And still some of the contracts even were signed distantly without any visit of the company. Of course, it's mostly for technological online businesses, which you could check remotely, not for assets you should visit, for instance, for instance, retail shops or whatever, you should visit them physically. But still, there were options, and we use these opportunities, and this is the lesson we actually learned, that you need to focus on the advantages, focus on the opportunities, and we did such, for instance, Startup Leaders Club every week, for Asia, for Europe, for Middle East, for Americas as well, so that people from all over the world could share their ideas, how they pivoted their business model during the COVID times, and they could do it cross-sector, so that they could listen to ideas to their peers in other segments and learn from each other. And it was a kind of our support initiative, which was really kind of advantage for people to participate in, and they could get their audience, they could get the attention of investors. Investors also brought in their master classes for startups, for instance, so that they could learn something new. And it still continues. Now we're all in a digital space. All the AI technologies also piercing, and a lot of things are still affecting that, so that we are not traveling too much, saving time to deliver better results for our investor base. I mean, doing the work actually on ground, but still we can show a lot and to our investors digitally, and they can access our products from all over the world, wherever they are, with our partners.
From your perspective, what is the most successful investor relations strategy in the context of alternative asset classes?
Each strategy should be adjusted to a particular team and their cycles of development, of course. So, and you should include the plans of your investor base, your target investor base, because, for instance, if it's a first-time fund, it's one strategy. It's mostly for friends, family, and some of the related investors who can support you in the first rounds.
I see that you avoid intentionally the word fools, friends, families, and fools. Right?
Actually, I don't think that, we all learn in our mistakes, but I don't like anchoring some groups of people with a label fool, right? Because you're always in this learning curve anyway. Because if you think that you know everything on your market, even if you work for years in that, under the word alternative asset class, it's a huge universe. Even if we take one startup or one particular investment, it's a huge universe with its workforce, people, human capital, with a lot of things there. So there's so many stories, especially if we take real estate as well, right?
Yeah.
Many things can happen if you build even one hotel, right? If it's a historical property or whatever. So it's a huge universe. And people who support you, personally, I don't feel comfortable in naming them fools, right? Especially in such asset classes where tangible asset classes, for instance, as real estate or whatever. So
Why I said that actually because previously we had another guest at our podcast, and he was mentioning, so I'm around these family, friends, and fools. So of course fools, because he was and he is currently an early stage investor. So he says once he sees someone with a social impact, sustainability, eco-friendly product, then he can just put on the table, let's say, an amount of $10,000 just straight away. So I think that would be really great for some startups. And may I ask you a question? So for you as a professional fundraiser, what is the main thing that any startup should take into account in order to succeed in terms of raising funds? Because I know that you work a lot with different types of investors, but maybe just one or let's say up to three things that startups should take into account.
Every startup is a unique story, as we mentioned. So there is no plain vanilla recipe, especially for startups. It's a very early stage, so the failure rate with startups is exceeding 90%, as you know. So, and fundraising, it depends really on what they achieve, if they have any traction, if they reach their cash generation stage, or they're just at MVP stage or earlier, and so on. So they may be testing their first hypothesis on the market and so on. The major is if they have reached their market fit, if they really feel and they have a feeling of the market they work with, if they have experience in that, is that a serial entrepreneur or is just a first-time starter. There are lots of criteria which we could include into the scoring, and for each entrepreneur and for each startup, they will have their own way. Some would need acceleration. Some mature teams may have a startup, but they have a huge track record and experience through various industries, and then can have a kind of a fast track in their industry through their connection, knowing exactly their business model, and so on. So probably for them, we usually come with tailor-made solutions for each startups. For acceleration, there are acceleration programs we could also help with. For instance, currently we're also mentoring one of the programs of Alchemist and Astana Hub, and they're accelerating about 90 startups from Kazakhstan. At times we have young entrepreneurs who just have an idea and come up with packaging almost from nothing. So they need a team, they need every resource just to test their hypothesis if they really want to start up in this particular area. At times we have quite mature teams from various fields who are ready for investors. They know they know everything about reporting. They have a sustainable financial model and business model. They have a market fit clients. They generate their cash flow, and so on. They have good advisors, and at times they even are present on several markets, and they have a good traction on each of them, and of course they some of them they go to pitch sessions themselves, or they may come to investor relations or fundraising advisory to help them to target particularly investors they should pitch, because at times when you're at times it's difficult to correct the story they convey after they're too much on the market buzzing around. And at times you get the feedback from investors that they have already heard the story, they are not interested, but maybe the story wasn't packaged in the right way, or maybe this particular startup reached another level and another result in their traction. So everything is individual. Of course, there are market standards And I mean, you have the presentation, you have teasers, you have database, a data room for investors, you have financial models, you have traction results, and you can show your team, your advisors, your strategy, and sustainable client base, everything. As for fundraising, it's all tailor-made, right? So it depends on particular markets, if we can get access to investors, to this or that particular investors. But usually it's important to fit, to have this match between a particular startup and investor, not to go pitching around everywhere, to dilute and a bit of degrade the potential value you can show, and make the story right for your target investors, not to everybody around.
I know that there are so many young entrepreneurs, and maybe not very young, who are watching our YouTube channel. What advice could you give to the startups? This is the first part of the question. And the second part is, do you have any specific field you are focused on? Let's say you can raise funds only for blockchain startups and edtech startups, or you have like quite wide spectrum of businesses, of the fields that you can help other startups to raise funds for them.
We have a special team, Pitch Tech, who specializes on various startups to help them in promoting their value and going with them smoothly through various stages of their development. Of course, we have in-depth interview with each particular entrepreneur, and looking at what is his background, what is his story, what's personal around his business, if, as I mentioned, if he has some serial experience before. So if we know his story, because at times the founders may have a very sustainable career, even in Big Four, in strategy consulting. They have a career in the profile industry, in top management of big firms, and then starting something of their own. And they know how to approach investors. For instance, as part of our National Alternative Investment Management Association, we launched an educational program for entrepreneurs, and invited private equity professionals from various areas, such as Columbia Business School, Seed Business School, Macau University, and these are real executives from funds. For instance, from Asia, we invited Professor Yong, who was a CEO, who's currently a CEO of Inventis, private equity firm with about 10 billion under management, and this executive with and he's also he's also the author of a couple of bestsellers, such as Private Equity in China, Due Diligence in China, and so on. And having this perspective from the US, Europe, Asia, at times entrepreneurs who were going into these fields of investor relations took all the three courses to have the perspective from various fields and backgrounds, from local private equity firms and their teams, how they work with entrepreneurs, and what is the areas of their interest alignment, and so on. And for earlier stages, as you mentioned, for startups, we also were part of introduction into one of the EMBA's Venture Academy. It's a kind of a program. Now we have acceleration program, mentorship programs, also advising companies directly on their packaging in a kind of tailor-made solutions or platform, because you need to educate a number of at times you need to educate the whole market and support the market initiatives to establish this long-term capital there, and to introduce new players, and for startups not to be afraid of the institutional players there, how to speak with angel clubs, with tech investor clubs, with venture firms, etc., how to elaborate their pitch and stay focused on their development and plan their fundraising path to IPO even, right? Because you need to understand how much of your stake you are giving to this or that investors, how do you develop your startup to a mature stage so that you could have this, envision your path to the future, not only the first round, the second round, but through various stages of your development.
Do you have any personal criteria for startups who are looking for your personal assistance in fundraising?
For every strategy, as I mentioned, for instance, as investor relations, I may work with some more mature products like pre-IPO, as I mentioned, or for real estate, if it's real estate portfolios. We also work with some particularly investors, helping them with their pipeline. They all have their own criteria on which sectors they're focusing on. They have their own investment ticket, which is comfortable for them. They believe in this or that market or have expertise in this or that markets. The most GPs I work with are more tech focused, so it's everything like it can be logistics tech, med tech, fintech, all the tech and innovation. These are the technologies that are globally scalable, so it's a huge market usually. So you have a huge market potential on every of the fields. You use your top-down analysis to see the industries where you want to have your targets in. You have your investors who want to back this or that areas, and here you find a match. So it's not a kind of a randomizer you're playing on.
What was your biggest investment ticket? If you feel comfortable to answer this question.
It's not like the biggest, it can be several hundreds of millions, for instance, if you are inviting on boards such big players as, for instance, Goldman Sachs or whatever, or EBRD or Temasek, it can be hundreds of millions, right, for a particular fund, for instance, because in their mandate they cannot invest lower than a particular size, for instance, it's not a kind of achievement of fundraiser in that field. It's a match between investor and the product, for instance, right? For instance, if we talk about startups, for instance, they even if you can attract a big ticket, they will not digest this amount of money, right? So it's a strong dependence and correlation between the product and the amount of money they want to digest. If we are talking about huge platforms, for instance, investment platforms, they can deploy a lot of capital. For instance, if we're talking about pre-IPO stages like Revolut, Cohere, OpenAI, they raise billions, right? And you can just take an allocation that you feel comfortable for your investor base. You can also partner with private banks, investment banks, and other players who could bring in their investors. You just provide the right infrastructure for them to easily join your product. And this is also a part of the journey. So not about boasting in tickets. I think the right approach is to find the right match in growing this value.
I love the way you answered the question, but what do you consider to be your biggest achievement in your career as an investor relations expert, as a professional fundraiser?
I don't consider it as a kind of reaching this or that milestones in terms of assets under management with companies or peers I work with. It's primarily a journey and your sustainability on the way, and how do you cope with different types of situations you encounter, and how do you keep up with your investor family. And for me, my achievement is that I work with some of my colleagues, industry colleagues, for years. Tens of years, and they keep on involving you in to their product. As you know, you can add. They know that you can add value to their product, and actually there are new strategies ongoing, and if they invite you at the early stage of their new strategies, their new product they want, so that you could participate in the creation of this new product, and making a kind of a change on the market level, for instance, with new solutions for industry players, I think it's a good achievement. So that's what I consider interesting for myself.
Perfect. What skills do you believe are essential for someone looking to succeed in investor relations within their alternative assets context?
Of course, it's a kind of, it's not that you could gain these skills immediately, right? It's a long way to go. And for instance, we also, at one of the stages of our development, we also helped in to set up certified alternative investment analyst charters in some of the emerging markets we were present in, so that it could be easier for market players to get to the knowledge of the alternative asset classes in depth, to know the ethics, standards, governance, risk management policies, and all the due diligence methods, and everything you enlisted, right? To have it through some specific degree, because most of the players in IR are still of a financial background. It also includes communication fields like PR, marketing, GR, even to lobby industry rights within different types of bodies, and associations like Emerging Market Private Equity Association, International Limited Partners Association, or you name it. Also, there are huge databases like Private Equity International, Preqin. Recently, BlackRock announced that they would acquire this huge database with around 200,000 users, actually. And they have a huge knowledge of this field. You have the knowledge on almost all the players, down to portfolio companies, of course. So all the different type of pension funds, family offices, venture capital firms, as well as fundraisers, advisors, gatekeepers, and all the service providers you would need on the way. So you should know the global picture of what you're getting to. You should know the details of the journey, the standards, and reporting standards, analytics, research. You should be able to collaborate and speak the same language with all the analytics, regulators, stakeholders, all the way to your investees within your company, with your investor family. So it's a kind of interaction. You should like that. You should like being on the road almost all the time. Also being on the calls, reporting, being reachable 24/7, because if you get the request from your investors, you need to specialize or tailor-made reporting for your investors. You should be reachable, and be ready, be honest with your investor base, come up with new solutions, new opportunities on time, and make them ready. For instance, for new initiative, for instance, if you plan another fund launch, to get into their schedule in advance, to have the knowledge base ready for them far ahead, for them to monitor your development and everything. The same with startups. You should work with investors, get their feedback, and actually implement their advice as well. Work with different types of advisors, as well as inviting them if they have the smart investor approach, and so on. So it's a huge area. You can advance in that. There are many specialized fields in that, in investor relations for corporate sector, for alternatives funds, and for fundraising and so on. So you can feel and know your strengths, all your tangible kind of achievements you could put on the table to this or that particular team you would like to join, or succeed through various series of funds with that particular GP. This is an interesting journey. So one of the best careers.
You know that our talks and meetings are never enough for me, but we need to wrap up a bit. I'm sure this is not our last topic to discuss. This is not our last podcast. We'll have many, many more. But you know, summing up at the very end, I asked the same question, all my guests. What is the biggest lesson that life has taught you?
So whatever turbulences, whatever changes are on the market, and I think this bubbling of economies around the global conflicts or whatever, at times you can lose the whole markets on your map, right?
Yeah.
And still you should, the lesson for me is to keep on going, because you have your core values, you have your standard and ethics, you know what you're doing, and focus on the value you're bringing on the board, and sharing with others, both on company level, industry level, and this is what will inspire you to move on, whatever happens, because in my experience, I met with investors, our families who derive their history from 13th century, for instance, and they went through a lot of global conflicts, right? 2 world wars, for instance, and they keep growing their capital, and they have entrepreneurial spirit. They strengthen within their teams, and you cannot manage the capital of this particular, for instance, family office without gaining entrepreneurial experience, without growing your own company and showing the results that you should get into the top tier players on this particular market or that particular market, and only after that you can go and have access to managing family money. So it's a kind of a balanced approach, the same everywhere. So if you understand your investors, if you're really interested in their stories, not only conveying your own, there are a lot of opportunities, a lot of synergy effect, a lot of partnerships, and this is what I prefer to focus on during whatever happens.
Thank you so much for your valuable insights. I have mentioned to you that before, but I will mention it to you here. You're my directing star and my daily piece of inspiration and motivation. Thank you so much. We should definitely the next show next time.
Thank you so much.